virtually any kid who has grown up in the past 2 decades of film has most likely watched a loose adaptation of a literary novel or play without even knowing it. I remember my cousin virtually embedding the 2006 film She's the Man, starring Amanda Bynes at the peak of her popularity, and Channing Tatum, pre-popularity, into my skull. However, it wasn't until much later that I realized that that was actually a loose, very loose, adaptation of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. I mean, being as I am an English lit major, I have had to read my fair dosage of the Bard. Ergo, watching She's the Man nowadays in 2019 takes on an entire new life form for me for more than a few reasons. This is primarily because being familiar with the source material kind of morphs your view of adaptations. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Shakespeare good and Hollywood movies bad, because that's not my intention here, and I can enjoy things for what they are. However, I do want to particularly examine an oft ignored form of adaptation medium, which is the literary web series. Following a global adaptations course I took a few semesters back in my major, I kind of became introduced to the world of different cultural adaptations. It really opened my eyes, but as a result, and as I learned that I had a bit of a penchant for studying adaptation theory and everything, I also kind of started to delve into different mediums. It was during this time actually that I kind of stumbled onto a little known series on YouTube called Nothing Much to Do, which is a 2014 adaptation of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. Up to this point, I had only ever really seen the Lizzie Bennet Diaries and Emma Approved, because I'm a huge Jane Austen fan, and I went through a huge phase in like junior year where I just wanted to watch as many Pride and Prejudice adaptations as I could, only further cementing my crush on Colin Firth forever. However, watching Nothing Much to Do kind of just opened up the door for what literary web adaptations could be, and like the changes they could make, and that was only further solidified with another lesser known series called 12th Grade or whatever. For this video, I want to focus on 3 works that were already mentioned, primarily 2012's Lizzie Bennet Diaries, 2014's Nothing Much to Do, and then 2016's 12th Grade or whatever. Specifically, I want to focus on how the medium of YouTube allows for more creative storytelling for a more younger audience. In order to expand on that point, I do want to very briefly just kind of go over the teen literary adaptation phase of the 90s and early 2000s, since it very much did pave the way for the form of literary web series that we see now. As well, I want to elaborate on how the medium and how this form of adaptation has allowed for the text to still remain, or the adaptations to remain very faithful to the text, while still taking creative freedom in a way that you don't see in modern adaptations, i.e., 2006 She's the Man, but you do see in 2016's 12th Grade or whatever. As well, I want to discuss how the same creative freedom that I just mentioned in terms of storytelling allows for characters and plots that might have been secondary or afterthoughts in the original source material. It allows more expansion and complexity. Finally, I want to discuss the potential future of these forms of adaptations and how they could be used within an academic perspective to be teaching students the source material better. Even though films and television used to definitely be the primary source of entertainment for younger generations, I think that we have definitely skewed more towards a YouTube generation, where YouTube has almost become the primary source of kids' entertainments. And ergo, as well, I think it should maybe be where academia maybe kind of starts to skew towards a little bit, i.e. why this is a video essay on YouTube versus an actual essay. So foremost, I want to discuss a little bit of the background of adaptation theory, i.e. why adaptations exist, why they're popular, and why they're important from an academic setting. Now, I promise to be as brief as possible because I don't want to bore you within the first few minutes. In her work, A Theory of Adaptation, Linda Hutcheon states 4 possible reasons behind the continued interest in creating adaptations: economic lure, the legal constraints, cultural capital, and finally, personal and political motives. For the sake of this case, we are going to focus on the cultural capital aspect for a reasoning behind the continued adaptation trend. As Hutcheon states, one way to gain respectability or increase cultural capital is for an adaptation to be upwardly mobile. Film historians argue that this motivation explains the many early cinematic adaptations of Dante and Shakespeare. Today's television adaptations of British 18th and 19th century novels may also want to benefit from their adapted works' cultural cachet. One of the biggest appeals in regards to creating a piece of work based on an already existing work versus, say, creating one's own idea, is that there is already a layer of credibility alongside it as well as a pre-established audience. One of the important facets to always remember about Hollywood is that entertainment is show plus business, and producers need to be reasonably sure that they can make a profit on their investment. Producers are going to want to imitate the blockbuster success of big movies that emphasize commercialism over quality. While it completely makes sense for someone whose career it is to make movies to want to make movies that actually make money, there is a point where the commercialization can become too much. From her chapter in Screening Shakespeare, Carolyn Jess-Cooke compares the fast food chain McDonald's to film productions, specifically within Shakespearean adaptations. As she states, its emphasis is on the schlock/exploitation circuit of Hollywood freelashes and an acute, if not annihilating, analysis of film ripoffs that champion loose endings, weak, cartoonish characters, inconsistent screenplays, stale narratives, fast pacing, loud music, and soundbite dialogue. Designed, one thinks, to assert the tagline ethos of consumer advertising in terms of the McDonald's "I'm Loving It" campaign. Dubbing the term McShakespeare, Cooke explains the commodification of the bard as present through the uniformity of meta-referential Shakespeare films that were generic to the teen genre of the 90s and early 2000s. Ergo, the work of Shakespeare, as well as many other classic literary works, are just as much cultural traditions as they are literal text. As previously mentioned, they were especially a convention of the teenage movie for the past few decades. Distinctly prominent within the genre was what Julie Sanders refers to as the analog adaptation, which shapes intertext of new cultural products in order to give a deeper understanding, at times even making a work that can stand alone independently. Think 10 Things I Hate About You, Clueless, Cruel Intentions, Oh, Get Over It, and of course, She's the Man. She's the Man transports the convoluted story of love and miscommunication present in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night to a then-modern 2006, wherein soccer is at the core of the story. To shortly summarize it, after the women's soccer team at Viola's school gets cut, and the boys' team will not take her in since she is a female and obviously of the weaker sex, she decides to attend her brother's new boarding school, Illyria, disguised as a boy in order to join the soccer team and prove her old coach wrong. In the process, she falls for her roommate Duke, who claims to love Olivia, who then falls in love with Viola, disguised as Sebastian, Viola's actual twin brother. By the end, Duke and Viola end up together, while Olivia seemingly ends up with Sebastian at the end, for the sake of keeping faithful to the text. While the film does at least put in the effort to establish Duke and Viola as the couple that's going to end up together by having them meet before, it truly is out of the realm of possibility as to why a modern-day Olivia would end up with Sebastian. Within the original play, they end up together because this is a comedy and everyone is supposed to end up happy and married. Unless you're Antonio, then you're banished off never to be seen again. During Shakespeare's time, aka when Twelfth Night was being written, it would have seemed incomprehensible for a man to end up with a man or for a woman to end up with a woman. It was the 1600s after all. While he might have been able to get away with slightly homosexual undertones, he would have never been able to have it pay off in a truly satisfying way. However, by the time She's the Man rolls around, the times have significantly changed. This is not to say that LGBTQ representation was even that good in 2006, but it was still miles better than what it was in 1601. And the fact that there was even any explicit portrayal at all within the film is also a milestone on its own. And so instead of having the ending changed at all they did was just introduce Antonio as a gay hairdresser and one of Viola's friends. And he basically marks off every single cliche gay stereotype you could. And he's not really an important character. Thus, the story of She's the Man basically decides to play the safe route, sticking very close to the original text when it's convenient, and then deviating away from it when something no longer seems modern. The bottom line of it is, within a filmmaking standpoint, having a homosexual ending for She's the Man would not have guaranteed a commercially viable success. Whenever a transition is made from text to visual medium, especially when it comes to films, the material does need to be accessible to a general mainstream public. But then came a little web series called 12th Grade or whatever. Produced by Quip Modest Productions in 2016, the literary web series 12th Grade or Whatever is a modern adaptation of Twelfth Night. As I have already stated the basic plot of the story during my summary of She's the Man, I do not feel the need to repeat it once again. Instead, I want to focus on how this adaptation exemplifies how creative one can get with this play once the pressure from bigger Hollywood studios is removed. Throughout the entirety of the show, and especially within the third act, the creators have truly brought the plot up to date for a modern audience by introducing queer elements as more than just subtext. By the 15th episode, the viewer is introduced to the character of Sebastian, and it is discovered that he is a transgender man whose boyfriend is aptly named Antonio. Thus, right from the start, the potential endgame of this adaptation is put into question because it seemingly rules out the last act of Olivia and Sebastian marrying one another. Later on, there is a scene wherein Viola, still disguised as Sam in this adaptation, kisses Oren, or the Duke, who still believes she is his male best friend up to that point. In response to Oren's confusion, Viola replies that she understands his response being as he is straight. However, Oren is quick to say the real issue is not the kiss itself, but the dishonesty. Once again, we see more branching out from the source material, with Oren being more preoccupied with his best friend lying to him foremost, an issue that is never discussed or brought up in Twelfth Night. The following few episodes quickly wrap up the story, and it is here that the most division between the play and the adaptation appears. By the end of the series, Olivia reveals herself to already know she is bisexual, Viola comes to terms with her own possible non-binary status, Oren explores his potential bisexuality with the help of Drew, Oren and Viola discuss how they are better off as best friends, and Viola and Olivia finally end up together. Yet, even with the drastic reshaping of that ending, the version still feels closer to the source material than, say, She's the Man. Now, I am not going to sit here and talk about textual faithfulness within film adaptations, especially when it comes to teen movies, because that's a different subject altogether. However, I will say that transporting a 1600s story to a 21st century audience no longer requires textual faithfulness when the context no longer applies. Prior to the final two acts of Twelfth Night, the homosexual undertones are very much present, only later being brushed off to the side like absolutely nothing because Renaissance England was not ready for that. I mean, hell, we weren't even ready for that a few decades ago. Unfortunately, it is still very rare to see a big budget Hollywood film accurately and willingly depict LGBTQ representation in a way that feels genuine and not like a side thought. Therefore, the modern and youth-oriented 12th grade or whatever is so important that it details the deviation from heteronormativity that occurs within this group of high school seniors, with Shakespeare as like the frame of reference. To return to the subject of creative liberties taken in web series adaptations, the possibility for expansion and depth within previously background characters or storylines has to be mentioned. There are two instances in which this is best exemplified: the entire character of Pedro in Nothing Much to Do, as well as in Lydia's storyline and characterization in the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. In 2014's Nothing Much to Do, another one of the Bard's stories is modernized for high schoolers, but this time with another comedy, Much Ado About Nothing. Unlike the previously mentioned series, this one aligns much more with the original source material to an almost flawless degree while still maintaining an aura of modernity. This is done through a few subtle decisions at the end. Not having Claudio and Hero in a relationship, having John return home and be forgiven / ask for forgiveness from those he hurt, and hint at Pedro being bisexual and in love with Balthazar. While Hero does end the show on good terms with Claudio, truly a better woman than me, they canonically do not end up together, unlike in the play where the two are married at the end. Also, while it is insinuated by both John and Benedict that Pedro and Balthazar have mutual feelings for one another, the audience never actually sees anything happen on camera. Now, without going too much into it, Nothing Much to Do does actually have a companion sequel series titled Lovely Little Losers, which is itself a loose adaptation of Love Labour's Lost. It is here where it is definitively stated that Claudio and Hero do not try to date again following the events of Nothing Much to Do as well, that Pedro and Balthazar actually do end up together after much back and forth. However, being as the events did not occur until after the end of the show in question, we are going to simply state that it was merely suggested because that is technically how the original show ends. However, the biggest change this series does is further expand not only on John's character, but also on his reasonings and motivations. Although Shakespeare was actually quite adept at formulating complex villains, he clearly did not see any reason in extending that courtesy to Dear John over here, whose motive is simply, I did it for the lulz. During the revealing episode titled Confession, John films what is essentially an apology video for Hero, who he states he never intended to hurt with his actions. As he puts it, Hero was never meant to be collateral damage. John prefaces his apology by explaining his tumultuous relationship with his older brother Pedro, which was the true catalyst for his behavior. His aim was to bring down Pedro's reputation as a result of his siding with Claudio, as he planned to later expose the whole cheating scandal as a ruse in order to further peg Pedro down from his high pedestal. Similarly, while John in the original play is simply never seen of again after the truth about his manipulations are revealed, Nothing Much Ado allows for a modern take of redemption and reconciliation. While there are definitely many instances in which a redemption arc is most definitely not needed, warranted, or deserved, the high school setting of this adaptation makes this ending justified and satisfying. Wherein Shakespeare's John might have potentially been in his 20s at the youngest, Nothing Much Ado's John is younger than the rest of the characters, making him likely to be in the range of 14 to 15 years of age, when making dumb decisions is at its prime. Another refreshing side effect to this is how the rest of the characters are A, genuinely concerned for his well-being, and B, forgive him for his stupid mistakes. Particular to this adaptation when compared to the play is its heavier focus on the brother relationship between Pedro and John, which in the end leads to them both growing and developing into more fleshed out and nuanced characters. This same trend of centralizing relationships that were not present in the source material can also be demonstrated in the web series that started it all, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. Before April of 2012, when the first episode of the show titled My Name is Lizzie Bennet premiered, literary-based web series were not a prominent genre that needed a whole master list to keep track of. However, its success definitely ushered in a new wave of adaptation potential. When discussing the practical reasoning behind choosing Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice in regards to adaptability, it can be argued that the story's focus on one particular family and their relationships with a few select others played a substantial role. With this at its foundation, creators Hank Green and Bernie Sue then consciously expanded on the inner lives of said family, with more emphasis being placed on the familial relationships. When I think of Pride and Prejudice, I think primarily of Colin Firth. Let's not lie to each other here. No, but seriously, I think of the relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth foremost, with the rest of the stories and characters being mostly secondary to me. Contrastingly, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries brings to mind the Bennet sisters themselves before the main romantic pairing. However, this is likely caused by Darcy himself only appearing in a handful of episodes, with most of the pivotal scenes involving him being told through dramatic reenactments courtesy of Lizzie herself. Yet, from an adaptational viewpoint, it has to be understood that these decisions were purposeful. Not only in terms of practicality, i.e. why would Darcy show up in any of Lizzie's early vlogs if she did not like him at this point, but also because the story told here is less so about the romances than it is about the sisters and their bond. Nowhere else in the story is this better embodied than in the complex and flawed character of Lizzie's youngest sister, Lydia Bennet. When she is initially introduced, Lydia is a very accurately and modernized version of her 1800s counterpart. She drinks too hard, parties too much, sleeps with too many guys, and skips too many classes. In Austen's novel, her characterization relies solely on her keenness to socialize and flirt with boys. And in the beginning of the web series, it appears as if we were going to be served the same character. However, the audience slowly begins to learn that there are many sides to Lydia, and that just like John from Nothing Much to Do, her reasoning and behavior might stem deeper than the surface level. Throughout the entire series, there are many subtle and sneaky ways which the writers and creators of the show try to get across that Lydia might be slightly misunderstood. But they are truly blank and you'll miss the moments. As with the previous two series, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries complete story is told through multiple YouTube channels. One of the secondary channels is actually Lydia's own channel, And it is here where most of her inner thoughts are displayed for the viewer. Just like her book counterpart, Lydia displays a sense of doing things without thinking them out constantly, such as when she begins skipping classes because of a guy, showing up unannounced to her cousin Mary's house and expecting her to cancel all her plans to hang out, and traveling alone to Los Angeles without her mother knowing in order to visit her older sister Jane. However, all of these erratic choices are rooted in her fear of being alone, with both Jane and Lizzie both having temporarily moved out of home at that point. As well, it is revealed in episode 86 that the last straw which made her act out was her mother saying that she needed to be more like Lizzie and Jane instead of herself. One of the main themes of Pride and Prejudice is prejudice itself, which in this adaptation crosses over into Lydia and Lizzie's relationship as well. This constant rejection of who Lydia is a constant running theme throughout the show, being showed predominantly with how Lizzie talks down to her constantly. The up and down sister relationship between these two could be argued to be the heart of the show, with Lydia wanting to be like Lizzie and Lizzie wanting Lydia to grow up. Despite her mocking, Lydia's idolization of Lizzie is quite obvious. She always wants to hang out or be around her, be a part of her vlogs, and she even had her own personal vlog ending mimic that of Lizzie's. In both the original and the web series, Lydia and George Wickham's illicit relationship is the catalyst that ultimately brings Darcy and Lizzie together, as well as provides the biggest conflict of the story. However, this too is changed in order to allow for Lydia to be more than a foolish young girl. Foremost, the adaptation provides for a sequence of rising action events that accumulate towards the eventual climax, starting with Lydia's birthday. Not only does Lizzie initially forget her own sister's birthday, but then she goes on to provide her with what has to be the world's worst gift, an advice book on how to be a more responsible adult. To make matters worse, Lizzie then goes on to describe her sister with the same offensive words that Caroline and Darcy had just used a few episodes ago. Well-intentioned or not, this ill-advised birthday gift acts as the turning point of the series. Just as when her mother previously brought her down earlier, Lydia reacts in the only way she knows how, by acting out and rebelling. Ergo, her deciding to pick George is not only a conscious decision to get back at Lizzie, but she is also running right into the arms of a man who, in her eyes, has been equally misunderstood by her sister. Now, I'm going to skip over the whole manipulation and deceiving Lydia part because not only is it hard to watch as a viewer, but it is difficult to even talk about it. However, I do want to add that her finding what she believes to be love in George is primarily due to her not wanting to feel alone or rejected anymore. I mean, the original Lydia could never. By the end, Wickham's blackmailing scheme is revealed, which is as low and disgusting as you would assume, and subsequently resolved as in the novel as well. However, this Lydia Bennet does not end up with George, which makes so much more sense when the story is transported to a modern day context. Truly, where this story shines the most is in its portrayal of Lydia, being one of the only adaptations to not only elaborate on her character in a way that feels authentic, but also provide backstory and motivations for her questionable behaviors. By the end of the story, her bond to Lizzie is one of the pillars of the show, becoming one of the final stepping stones for our titular protagonist to overcome her unjust prejudices of others. Green and Sue took one of the flattest and generally disliked characters of Pride and Prejudice and converted her into a fan favorite. Finally, we are almost at the finish line, but there is just one more thing that I want to briefly discuss about why I think these literary web series are so important. The future of teen adaptations of literary works as a whole really needs to see a shift. With the era of Shakespearean-based adaptations that was extremely prominent in the 90s especially, as well as somewhat in the early 2000s, is slowly starting to fade out. However, even when they were popular and mainstream and still in demand, they still might not have always been the most useful resources within an academic context. I'm looking at you, Clueless. You might be my favorite movie of all time, but the term loose adaptation might be a little too generous. As the younger and younger generations of children start to steer more towards YouTube as their source of entertainment, I mean, do kids even watch PBS or Disney Channel or Nick Jr. or Disney Jr. any of that anymore? Like, you instead see kids with iPads watching toy videos on YouTube or slime videos. They have hundreds and hundreds of millions of views by children who are genuinely watching them. As YouTube and the internet and this entire medium starts to become maybe the primary medium for young generations and kids, I think that the way that we teach kids as well should maybe skew towards a way that they're already more familiar with. I can tell you right now that I distinctly remember in high school, specifically during my 10th grade English class, we got so lucky that our teacher was so like chill. We got to watch 2012's version, like Joss Whedon's 2012 version of Much Ado About Nothing, and I remember just being so ecstatic because I love that version. It's one of my favorites, but there was like a general just sigh of discontent and like ugh from like the entire class mostly. I mean, one of my best friends even fell asleep while we were watching it. The same thing happened next year when we were juniors and we were forced to read Romeo and Juliet and then watch 2 of the adaptations of it. I mean, there was even a general sigh of boredom during the 1996 Baz Luhrmann version of Romeo and Juliet, which at the time that it was released was geared towards teenage audiences as being part of that Shakespeare, you know, literary adaptation genre that was so prominent. But by the time that 2014 came around and I was a junior, it was met with sighs of, I don't really want to watch that. And that was only 5-6 years ago, so I cannot even imagine what today's generation of kids are probably feeling. As long as the web series appear to be, with the Lizzie Bennet Diaries definitely toppling the rest with a total of 170 episodes, the average episode probably is an average 4 to 5 minutes per clip, with the entire show, all of its channels, probably being able to be finished in about 8 hours. Nothing Much to Do takes an even significantly less time with only 88 episodes. And then the story of 12th grade or whatever could easily be seen within the span of one long class period, being as it's only 56 episodes long. While I do see the merit in showcasing adaptations in class that stick very closely to the original source text, as seen in Much Ado About Nothing and Romeo and Juliet in both of those cases, or are maybe set in the same time period as the story that we're reading, which could probably be seen obviously in like 2005's Pride and Prejudice, which we also had to watch in 9th grade. I still believe that there is some academic merit in showing these more modernized web series. Although they do have the capabilities and the freedom to, you know, completely deviate from the original source material when the context is no longer necessary, they still actually remain very, very close to the original plot and story, even if they have to change dialogue or setting. Therefore, maybe instead of having to watch another film or TV series adaptation from the 90s or early 2000s or whatever, or even just 2012 apparently, that may stick a bit more closely and have a bit more academic merit to the original source material, maybe we should try to get kids to like further expand on the source material by showing them a more modernized version through a medium that they are already more familiar with and that they connect with more. But then again, what do I know?